Today I'm going to answer a new question. It's why is there often so much loneliness on the spiritual path? And particularly, why can it be such a burden to deal with all the suffering that you're seeing and hearing around you when you're on a spiritual path? So again, to sum that up, why is there so much loneliness so often on a spiritual path? And why is it so difficult to deal with the suffering that you perceive in the world around you when you're on a spiritual path? That's a question that's been very present in my life. It's been a very active process of coming through that sort of dark wood, coming through all of that difficulty of accepting the state of the world. And if you're coming into a conscious awakening now, if something is arising in you now, if consciousness is arising in you now, you're pretty early to the party. Humans as a collective right now, we're still in a state of pretty identified consciousness, identified with thought and paradigms that we have built up over millennia at this point. And it's a minority of people who are looking directly into the essence of what they are, the consciousness that they are, and moving out of all of the normalized mental structures in the world that ask us all to conform, and if we're in the mind state, to which we conform pretty naturally, because it's the collective external structures of our world are a mirror of our internal state, our collective internal state. So if you're somewhere in the normal range of that collective consciousness as an individual, that is to say, if your internal state is more or less like most of the world, then you're going to basically fit in to those structures. It's going to be easier, or relatively easy, to fit into those structures, because what is reflected around you as the collective state of the world more or less fits with your own internal state, of identification with thought, and maybe looking to get somewhere, looking to progress materially, looking for improvement in this very mental way in your life. And if you're connecting to a rising presence, a rising consciousness, and on that inward path, not looking to get something out in the world as much as you are looking for that internal awakening, you're definitely not up with the trend of the world right now. That's not the momentum of the majority of our collective consciousness right now, which is very involved in endless growth, endless material acquisition and progress, and it's very involved in a mental stream, in the mind, in continuous thought. So if you're disengaging from that and you're just coming into the simplicity of something more profound and fundamental, you are at the beginning of a shift in consciousness that has to happen in our species if we're going to make it, if we're going to survive, because as we continue in this mental collective state, we only increase our technological capacity, we only increase, we amplify our state of consciousness through all these new technologies, these new tools that we create as a species. We amplify our dysfunction, our subtle dysfunction. So all of the confusion that's in each of us, all of the false identification with thinking and with a sort of a sleep state of consciousness, an unawakened state of consciousness, is amplified by increasing technological power, and that's not going anywhere good. So the only good place it is going is that it's going to probably force us at some point to realize how dysfunctional we are. The amplified dysfunction makes it more evident that something is not working, and that what's not working is deeper than a problem that we can fix with our minds. It's not going to be, a 1-2-step solution. It's something more fundamental within us that's going to need to shift, and I think that becomes more evident as the dysfunction increases. When that dysfunction becomes evident to you as an individual, that's very difficult a lot of times, because you're seeing that things are not working. You're seeing that suffering is everywhere, and that the proposed solutions around you are not ultimately solutions. They may be temporary fixes, but they're so superficial if they're coming from this identified mind state of consciousness that they're not really going to resolve the deeper dysfunction that is present in our social disorder, which is to say, the problems around us are only going to be finally resolved through an inner awakening, through a shift in our state of being that is reflecting itself outwardly in collective dysfunction. And when you see that, when you intuit that, maybe you don't fully understand that mentally, but you start to feel like there's something else and we're not getting it. If you're one of the earlier people to realize that, it's not an easy thing to come to, because you're not seeing that answer reflected around you in society, in other people. You probably initially will feel like you're the only person who feels that way. Why does this not feel like it's adding up? And on top of that, awakening consciousness in you, awakening presence in you, means a very acute awareness of dysfunction. It means that you're seeing more consciously, more presently, how dissatisfied people are, how cruel they can be, how collectively cruel our systems are and the structures around us are, and basically how meaningless, ultimately meaningless, a lot of our social order is. That the constant movement towards growth that so many of us are invested in, really towards material growth, is not going anywhere ultimately productive. It's not the answer for us. It's not going to solve our state of dissatisfaction. On the contrary, right now, it's only amplifying that state of dissatisfaction in the broadest sense. So seeing that and realizing that, and having still not so many people around you realize that, is isolating. And there's a lot of pressure from the world around you to keep up, to maintain its flow of energy, to stay in its state of consciousness. So you, if you're starting to awaken, feel like you're in a world that doesn't reflect you anymore. It doesn't reflect what you know to be true in such a visceral sense that you can't deny it. So effectively, you are marginalized from the world, and that's always difficult, whether you're marginalized because of a state of consciousness or because of something else. To be on the margins of a social order is always difficult. And if you're used to being more in the norm, in the mainstream, and backed up by that social functioning, and suddenly you find yourself outside of it, that's very disorienting. And that marginalization is something that you're not adapted to yet. You haven't figured out how to deal with that. So there is a simple dimension of marginalization that occurs when you start to wake up and realize, this is not what I thought it was. This is not what it seems to be. As you deepen awareness and make decisions in your life that reflect that deeper awareness, you can start to create a smaller, separate world for yourself, and find a separate peace, is a way to put it. So find a sort of a microcosm, a smaller world for yourself that does reflect that new state of consciousness that's coming up in some people and in some parts of the world right now. And that does make things a lot easier. That shift is a process. It's decisions that you make. It's deepening awareness in yourself. And more than anything, as you look at the parts of yourself that are unresolved, as your awakening deepens, as you move more deeply into presence and into that sort of eternal space of resolution in yourself, you stop reacting so much and feeling so heavily the dysfunction around you. You step out of it in the deepest sense. You step into an ever-present resolution in yourself. And it's not so personally pressing. The dysfunction around you is not so invasive in your personal experience. So you'll see it acutely, you'll see it everywhere, but you'll see it with a little bit more internal distance. It won't be so personal to you. It won't be something that you react to so intimately. It's still upsetting to see the world in such a state of dysfunction, but as you come more deeply inward and into that light within you, the loneliness starts to subside because you feel an aliveness in that presence itself. There's a company, there's life within you in that arising consciousness. You become more comfortable with being outside of the world's current flow, current state of being, and you also become less reactive to its dysfunction. So you are able to channel that arising consciousness, you're able to share that arising consciousness without such a sense of personal urgency. Like, if people don't realize this, I'm in trouble. You can't make anything happen from that state. And it's a slow arising in any state, in any event, it's a slow arising. So stepping out of that internal state of identification with how dysfunctional everything is, that internal personal sense of urgency with how dysfunctional everything is, stepping more into a deeper resolution within you, that arising consciousness that you can feel, allows you to act from that space, act from that state of resolution, feel comfortable in that state of resolution, even as you're addressing the massive discomfort and dysfunction in the world around you. So there is a path out of loneliness. It is, of course, the path more deeply into the arising consciousness that you can already feel. And it also is a way out of the heaviness and the burden of all of the suffering and dysfunction that you're seeing more clearly around you as you start to awaken.